passion. Strong emotions are an unavoidable part of life. And in the Bible, we have a very well-known character known for a passionate life. His name is Samson. He's one of the strongest men in the Bible, and he's one of the greatest heroes, also mentioned in the New Testament. But he is also one of the weakest men in the Bible, and one of the greatest train wrecks that you will ever hear of. What makes this paradox of a man tick? What happened wrong that he did not end his life in glory and in honor and with self-satisfaction, but he ended it in ironic tragedy with his own death? When you look in the book of Judges, and it talks about his life in 4 chapters, 3 of those chapters are like comic marvels, just tons of adventures. He's going out and smashing things and winning battles. But one whole chapter is dedicated to the time between the angel and his parents before he was even born. Now that's very unusual. Why would you waste a whole chapter on this conversation between his parents and his angel and then spend only 3 on his whole life? In those days, they wrote on parchment with ink and animal skins, and don't tell me that the inspired writer of the Bible would just waste his time laboriously writing down details unless there was a point to it. And so today, we're going to answer this question of, number 1, why was Samson such a paradox? And number 2, what can we learn from it in terms of how to handle our emotions in life? Turn with me, if you will, to Judges 13. If you have a Bible, please open it, because we're going to read it very carefully. Judges 13, and it starts out with, again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. So the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. A certain man of Zorah, named Manoah, from the clan of the Danites, had a wife who was childless, unable to give birth. The angel of the Lord appeared to her and said, "You are barren and childless, but you are going to become pregnant and give birth to a son. Now see to it that you drink no wine or other fermented drink, and you do not eat anything unclean. You will become pregnant and have a son whose head is never to be touched by a razor, because the boy is to be a Nazirite." We'll explain that in a minute. Dedicated to God from the womb, he will take the lead in delivering Israel from the hands of the Philistines. We're on verse 6. Then the woman went to her husband, and she told him, "A man of God came to me. He looked like an angel of God, very awesome. I didn't ask him where he came from, and he didn't tell me his name. But he said to me, 'You will become pregnant, and you will have a son. Now then, drink no wine or other fermented drink, and don't eat anything unclean, because the boy will be a Nazirite of God from the womb until the day of his birth.' And Manoah prayed to the Lord, 'I beg you, pardon your servant. I beg you to let the man of God you sent to us come again, to teach us how to bring up the boy who is to be born.' God heard Manoah. And an angel of God came again to the woman while she was sitting out in the field, but her husband Manoah was not with her. The woman hurried to tell her husband. She said, 'He's here, the man who appeared to me the other day.' And Manoah got up, and he followed his wife. And when he came to the man, he said, 'Are you the man who spoke to my wife the other day?' And he said, 'I am.' So Manoah asked him, 'When your words are fulfilled, what is to be the rule that governs the boy's life and his work?' The angel of the Lord answered, 'Your wife must do all that I told her. She must not eat anything that comes from the grapevine, nor drink any wine or fermented drink, or eat anything unclean. She must do everything I have commanded her.'" There are 3 insights from this chapter, and I'll tell you them up front. They're, number 1, passion is a gift from God. Number 2, passion requires honing. Honing means sharpening, narrowing, bringing an intense point, like with a pencil. And number 3, holy passion honors God. Number 1, passion is a gift from God. Number 2, passion requires honing. And number 3, holy passion honors God. Let's look at passion as a gift. Passion is a gift from God when God's people are complacent cowards. If you look at the beginning of this chapter, it says, the Israelites were oppressed by the Philistines for 40 years. And yet, Unlike all the previous 4 cycles in Judges, where they disobey the Lord, they get oppressed, they cry out for help, and God brings a deliverer, here, do you know what's missing? They're not crying out. They have come to accept oppression, and they are cowards. Now you say to me, you're just reading that into there. They just dropped that phrase. No. If you remember the story of Samson, after he burned down their fields, he ran away to the cave of Adam, and the Philistines went to the Judaites and said, hand over your champion, whoever he is. And those guys went up to the cave of Adam, and do you remember the words they asked? They said when they saw Samson, they said, don't you know that the Philistines are lords over us? What have you done to us? That's cowardly. They feel he is the source of their trouble and not their oppressors. And then he says to them, all right, I will put myself in your hand, but he made them swear that they would not kill him before he's handed over. He doesn't trust them either. So when God's people have lost all hope, when God's people have accepted their bad state as normal, when they have no more courage to stand up, you need a leader who has passion, because that will not come from around, it has to come from within. And so God's people needed passion in their leader. Number 2, a passionate child is a gift. Now, Manoah and his wife didn't have any children, so had they had any children, like a sweet little girl, they would have been tickled. But God gave them a passionate child. And I have a passionate child. And do you know what they are? They're a pain in the neck. But they're a wonderful gift because they require more energy, they require constant supervision, they're always pushing your buttons and your boundaries, and they embarrass you every chance they get. But the gift they give you is the gift of humility, because you realize you cannot raise this child on your own. You need God. And so after my first child, who was so sweet and compliant, and I was starting to get a big head, God gave me the gift of humility in a passionate child. It is a gift, not a curse. Third, passion was a gift to the sterile marriage. You see, if you look carefully at the verses in this chapter, there are hints that this marriage is not what it ought to be. First of all, the angel comes to the woman twice, and she's alone. And where's her husband? Back somewhere, sitting down. Because it says, the husband prayed to the Lord, send us the man again, show us how we should raise him. And God hears Manoah. It says very clear, God hears Manoah's prayer. But instead of sending the angel to the one who prayed for it, what does he do? He skips over Manoah, goes, finds his wife in the field, and tells her the exact same thing he told her before. So she has to go, the angel is waiting, she has to go and get her husband, and he has to follow her to find out what God's will is. Now, if you understand Israelite history, this is very unusual in a patriarchal society. A man does not follow his wife to find out God's will for him. What is God doing here? It even emphasized when she was out in the field, the verse says, but her husband Manoah was not with her. There's a bit of loneliness. There's a sense of separation from these two. They're not together. And one more thing. I'll give you 2. 1, she's never named. We know Manoah's name. We have no idea what her name is. And yet, in every narrative story of the Bible, you name the principal characters and you forget about the rest. But she's the principal character. Why would a biblical writer put a whole chapter around Manoah's mother and never give her name? Because he's reflecting how her society demeans her, marginalizes her for being barren, and yet how God, by focusing his divine attentions upon her, is trying to lift her up, her value and her importance. And in this marriage, he's also trying to center her in the middle of her husband's attentions, saying, listen to this woman. Pay attention to what she's going through. Pay attention to even what she eats, because that's what the instructions were. The second point is, I don't think he believes what she says. Because she said, the man who talked to me the other day is here. And when he came, what were his first words? Are you the man who talked to my wife? If I said that to my husband, hey, the guy who was here at the door, he's here again, my husband wouldn't question me. All right, what do you want? Right up, he just expects it. This guy has trouble respecting his wife. So I suggest that one of the most important subtexts in this text is, before Samson is born, God is doing divine marriage therapy. He's bringing these two closer together, trying to unite them in the common goal by fulfilling their dream and setting up parenthood the way it ought to be. Did Samson learn from his father then? Did this therapy stick? Did Samson learn from his father how to respect women, treat them as co-partners in faith, look at them as possible channels of divine revelation? Or did Samson treat women as tools for his pleasure, both mocking and obsessing over their beauty as fulfilling his desires? What do you think? Passion is a gift. Passion requires honing, number 2. You know, Manoah asked the burning question of all parents. What is to be the boy's life? What is to be the boy's work? How shall we raise him up? Excellent questions. And the angel comes to his wife and repeats the exact same thing, focusing on the wife's diet. Why is he frustrating Manoah? This is an excellent question. Why does God not answer our prayers? Let's look at what he says. He tells him the Nazirite rules for diet. Now, if you don't know them, it's worth refreshing yourself. And I'd like you to turn to it right now. It's in Numbers 6. We'll just focus on the dietary part of it, verses 1 through 5. Numbers 6, verses 1 through 5. And you've got to put on your listening ears, because a little detail is the needle in the haystack. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, if a man or woman wants to make a special vow, a vow of dedication to the Lord as a Nazirite, they must abstain from wine and other fermented drink, and must not drink vinegar made from the wine or other fermented drink. They must not drink grape juice or eat grapes or raisins. As long as they are under the Nazirite vow, they must not eat anything that comes from the grapevine, not even the seeds or the skins. During the entire period of their Nazirite vow, no razor may be used on their head. They must be holy until the period of their dedication to the Lord is over. They must let their hair grow long." Now, when the angel is giving Manoah's wife her prohibitions, he repeats almost word for word these found in number 6, except the angel ad-libs one phrase at the end. 3 times it's repeated. When the angel tells the wife, when the wife reports what the angel said to her husband, and the second time around again. And it's the details that count, because he says, she must do everything that I have commanded her. What is that phrase that is mentioned there that is not in number 6? It is not to eat unclean foods. So what did you say? That's obvious. She's a Jew. She's not supposed to eat unclean foods. Well, you've got to understand how it sounds. If one of my friends, an Seventh-day Adventist, came to me and said, you know, I'm ready to go a whole level higher. I want to be closer to God. I want to make my temple, my body a temple of the Lord, even purer. So I'm going to go vegan. Can you tell me what that means? And I explain, this is what vegan means, ... And what if I add at the very end, by the way, you can't eat pig's feet and snails and snakes. And she would look at me like, of course I don't eat that. That's unclean foods. Do you see it? Most Jews don't eat unclean foods. Why would an angel then have to say 2 times to this woman, don't eat unclean foods? May I suggest, maybe she had a problem. Maybe she has an issue with her appetite. Is it not so hard to imagine that a boy who grows up to be a man who cannot control his appetites, his passions, may have come from a mother who has trouble with her impulses and her appetites? And could it not be possible that the angel is saying, you need to control this part of your impulses with God's help, so that you can model to a son who will also have strong urges how to control with God's help and discipline them? Could it be that the angel was answering Manoah's question by saying, it starts here? Did it work? We know the story. God used Samson in spite of his impulsivity. He loved the Lord. It's very evident. He had a relationship with God. But instead of being a disciplined, inspirational leader who got all of Israel roused up from their spiritual slumber and cast off the control of the Philistines, he was a one-man volatile grenade, blowing up wherever he happened to be. Yes, the Lord used him, but his life is still tragic because his mother may not have paid attention to what the angel earnestly said 3 times. She must do everything I commanded her. What more can God do? Passion requires honing. But I cannot make a hypothesis from a failed case. So let us go to the New Testament for the third point. Holy passion honors God. Think of Samson's mirror image, New Testament. John the Baptist is another famous Nazarite. He also had an angelic visit before he was born, who also reminded his parents he's going to be a Nazarite. So let's go ahead and compare him. Luke 1, verses 6 to 7 tells us that John the Baptist's parents are very different from Samson's parents. What does it say? It says both of them, Luke 1, 6 and 7 says, both of them were righteous in the sight of God, observing all the Lord's commands and decrees blamelessly. But they were childless because Elizabeth was not able to conceive, and they were both very old. You have here 2 people who are very self-controlled and righteous. Notice what happens when John the Baptist is going to be circumcised. 8 days after he's born, all the neighbors, all the friends gather in, and here you have this little old lady. I mean, she's very old, probably still convalescing in her bed. And as they circumcise him and they get ready to name him, they want to name him Zechariah after his father. And what does the mother, the aged mother, say? No, she says. His name is John. And you can just see the incredulity in their voice. They're going, no one of your relatives has that name. Oh, you just imagine them thinking, she's just a woman. Let's go to the father of the house. So they go off to Zechariah, and they ask him, what do you want to name him? And he motions for paper. So they give him paper, a tablet. And he writes, his name is John. And the Bible says, to their astonishment, that's what he writes. Why are they astonished that the husband agrees with the wife? And it's only after he writes that name, not when John is born, but after he writes that name and supports his wife, that his mouth is unleashed and he pours out in blessings to the Lord. In the midst of all that verbal voluminosity, you could imagine Elizabeth probably smiling and beaming with love from across the room saying, thank you for supporting me 100%. And you can almost imagine Zechariah grinning at his wife and saying, that's my girl. She stands up to anybody when it comes to God's will. These 2, united in the Lord, strong and able to stand together against all the pressure of their friends and their neighbors. No wonder they can raise John the Baptist, a man who can rail unflinchingly against the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the soldiers, and even King Herod, and he is not afraid of anyone. At the same time, this passionate man has the gentleness to step aside and say these immortal words, he must become greater, and I must become less. To have the whole range of passion, the fiery fire that convicts, and the fluid water that steps aside. No wonder Jesus can say of John, I tell you, Luke 7:28, among those born of woman, there is none greater than John. Passion is a gift. Passion requires honing, and holy passion honors God. Ellen White says, Education 57, the greatest want of the world is the want of men, and women I would add, who will not be bought or sold, men who in their inmost souls are true and honest, men who do not fear to call sin by its right name, men whose conscience is as true to duty as the needle to the pole, men who will stand for the right though the heavens fall. May we become such people of passion in these end times.